I am Clara. I am 32 years old, and exactly 1 week ago, my own mother stood up at my younger sister's lavish rehearsal dinner and proudly announced to a room of 80 distinguished guests that I was not her real daughter. She delivered this devastating statement with a beaming, triumphant smile on her face, standing in front of our entire extended family and social circle, while simultaneously bragging that she and my father were single-handedly financing the extravagant wedding. She boldly claimed this while actively utilizing the massive sum of money I had been secretly, dutifully funneling into their accounts for an entire decade. The entire ballroom instantly went dead silent. Every single head slowly turned to look directly at me. I could physically feel the crushing weight of their collective pity, the frantic, buzzing whispers, and the suffocating pressure of absolute public humiliation pressing down on my chest like an anvil. And then, against all their expectations, I smiled right back at her. I smiled because I was armed with a devastating truth that absolutely no one else in that room possessed. 3 short sentences later, all the color violently drained from my mother's face. Before I take you through the agonizing, meticulously calculated steps of how I finally dismantled the illusion of my family, if you find yourself connecting with this journey of survival, please take a moment to engage with this story. But I ask that you only do so if you truly, deeply understand the pain of being the invisible pillar holding up a collapsing house. I would also love to know exactly who is sitting in the dark listening to me right now. Drop a comment letting me know what city you are tuning in from and what time it currently is in your part of the world. Now, I need you to travel backward in time with me. Let me take you back exactly 10 years to the specific, quiet afternoon when this entire nightmare truly began. 10 years ago, I was 22 years old. I was a fresh university graduate, armed with an accounting degree and a grueling, entry-level corporate job that barely generated enough income to cover my basic rent and groceries. Despite the financial struggle, I naively believed I had the trajectory of my entire adult life perfectly mapped out. From the outside looking in, my family appeared flawlessly, aggressively perfect. My father, Harrison Vance, had been a highly respected, well-compensated regional sales director for over 2 decades. My mother, Eleanor, was a dedicated homemaker who managed and fiercely protected our family's pristine social reputation as if it were a demanding, full-time corporate profession. And then, there was my younger sister, Juliet. She was exactly 18 years old at the time. She was golden-haired, effortlessly radiant, and possessed a natural, magnetic charm that made people instantly fall in love with her. She had just been officially accepted into an incredibly prestigious, obscenely expensive university on the East Coast. The blatant, suffocating favoritism within our household was absolutely not a new development. It had perpetually existed, deeply and intrinsically woven into the very fabric of our family dynamic, like an ugly, frayed thread that everyone actively saw, but universally agreed to never acknowledge out loud. When I proudly graduated from university with honors, my parents hosted a painfully brief, modest dinner at our house. Exactly 5 people attended. My mother casually patted my shoulder and said, "You have never truly enjoyed large, noisy crowds anyway, Clara." I did not argue with her assessment. I never, ever argued. Exactly 2 months later, when Juliet received her university acceptance letter in the mail, my parents completely lost their minds. They rented out the entire main dining room of a high-end local restaurant. They invited over 50 guests. They ordered a towering, custom-designed 3-tier cake. My father stood up, tears in his eyes, and delivered a 20-minute, impassioned speech about how incredibly, overwhelmingly proud he was of his brilliant little star. I sat quietly in the dim corner of the room, politely clapping my hands along with the rest of the audience. Juliet simply requires a significant amount of external encouragement, my mother impatiently explained to me later that evening when I cautiously inquired about the massive discrepancy in our celebrations. She is very young, Clara. She desperately needs our constant support to thrive. You, on the other hand, have always been fiercely capable of taking care of yourself. I silently forced myself to believe her logic. Juliet was the baby of the family. She naturally required more oxygen in the room. I was the older sister. I was designated to be the steady, reliable, utterly invisible foundation. That was my assigned, permanent role in the ecosystem. I possessed absolutely no idea that in just a few short weeks, my father would initiate a phone call that would permanently alter the entire trajectory of my existence. A phone call that would violently transform me from the invisible, neglected daughter into something else entirely, a silent benefactor they would spend the next decade aggressively pretending did not exist. The very first warning sign materialized approximately 1 week prior to that fateful phone call. I was visiting my parents' house for our mandatory Sunday dinner when I accidentally overheard my mother and father arguing in hushed, urgent tones in the kitchen. They were aggressively planning to purchase Juliet a vehicle. Not just a reliable, used commuter car, but a brand new, zero-mileage luxury sedan for her to drive around her new college campus. "We absolutely cannot have her taking public buses like a commoner," my mother hissed fiercely. What on earth would the other families think of us? I stood frozen in the hallway and thought about my own grueling, daily commute. I spent nearly 2 hours each way on a decaying public transit system. I rode crowded, unair-conditioned city buses. I endured terrifying, late-night walks from the train station back to my cheap apartment. Absolutely no one in that house had ever spent a single microsecond worrying about what society thought of my degrading commute. I did not utter a single word of protest. I never did. I simply swallowed the bitter resentment down, locking it away. Keep the artificial peace, Clara. Always keep the peace. That following Thursday evening, my cell phone vibrated violently on my nightstand at exactly 11 o'clock at night. The caller ID flashed my father's private number. When I answered, his voice sounded drastically, terrifyingly different. It was incredibly small, hesitant, and visibly trembling. "Clara, I desperately need to speak with you. But you absolutely cannot mention this conversation to anyone. Especially not to Juliet." My father was an incredibly arrogant, fiercely proud man. In my entire 22 years of existence, I had never, ever heard him sound this thoroughly defeated. "Dad, what is wrong?" I asked, sitting up in bed, my heart suddenly racing. A long, agonizing pause stretched over the cellular connection. Then, the dam finally broke. "I completely lost my job, Clara. They let me go 3 weeks ago. And our private retirement portfolio, it is almost entirely gone. I made some incredibly aggressive, bad investments. I genuinely thought I could fix the losses before anyone noticed. But..." His voice cracked, breaking into a dry sob. My father, the untouchable patriarch who never displayed a single ounce of vulnerability. The man who endlessly lectured us at the dinner table about strict financial responsibility. The man who openly, cruelly looked down upon anyone who failed to manage their own economic affairs. He was calling his invisible, neglected daughter in the middle of the night, pathetically begging for a lifeline. "What exactly do you need from me?" I asked quietly. "Just, please do not tell your mother that I called you weeping like this. She is already crumbling under the stress of the situation, and Juliet absolutely must remain focused entirely on her upcoming university studies." Even then, even in the absolute epicenter of a catastrophic crisis, I was the only family member they felt comfortable burdening with the brutal reality without feeling an ounce of guilt. What he proposed over the next hour would permanently reshape the architecture of our relationship forever. Though I did not possess the wisdom yet to know whether it would ultimately destroy us or bind us together in a toxic trauma bond. My father meticulously laid out the entire disaster over the phone. He had been abruptly terminated without a severance package or prior warning. Corporate restructuring, the Human Resources Department had clinically called it. At 55 years old, operating in a highly competitive market, absolutely no one was interested in hiring him. He had frantically submitted dozens of executive applications and received nothing but silence. The situation regarding their retirement fund was significantly worse. Several years prior, blinded by greed, he had aggressively moved the vast majority of their secure assets into what a country club friend had promised was an absolute sure thing. The sure thing violently collapsed into bankruptcy. What was supposed to be their impenetrable financial safety net had entirely evaporated into thin air. "We are currently 3 full months delinquent on the primary mortgage," he finally admitted, the shame practically radiating through the phone. If we fail to make the upcoming payment, the bank will initiate foreclosure. We will lose the family home. The very next morning, my mother called me. Her voice was thick, wet, and heavy with dramatic tears. "Clara, your father confessed to me that he spoke with you last night. I know we possess absolutely no right to ask this of you, but you are literally the only human being on Earth who can save us. Juliet is still just a child in school. She obviously cannot secure employment, and we absolutely cannot risk telling anyone else in our social circle about this humiliation. You understand the necessity for discretion, do not you?" I understood. I had spent my entire life understanding their obsession with appearances. "What exactly do you need me to do, Mom?" "We just desperately need a little bit of financial assistance each month until your father secures a new executive position. We will absolutely pay you back every single cent, of course." But Clara, her voice dropped to a frantic, paranoid whisper. "Absolutely no one can ever know about this arrangement. Not Juliet, not your aunts, not anyone in the community. We simply cannot have people gossiping that this prominent family is struggling." At that specific point in my life, I was earning a gross salary of $52,000 a year. After deducting my exorbitant rent, basic utilities, and aggressive student loan payments, I was left with perhaps $800 of disposable income each month. They were asking me to wire them $2,500 a month. I said yes anyway. "You are such an incredibly good, loyal daughter," my mother whispered through her tears. "You are the absolute best. We will never, ever forget this massive sacrifice, Clara. Never." I aggressively set up an automated, recurring wire transfer that very same week. On the first of every single month, $2,500 would silently, flawlessly flow from my checking account directly into their depleted retirement trust. I immediately volunteered to pick up brutal overtime shifts at the firm. I canceled my gym membership. I entirely stopped dining out with friends. I lived on rice and discounted produce. It was explicitly promised to be a temporary, emergency measure. It was absolutely not temporary. Let me paint a vivid picture for you of exactly what 10 years of a temporary emergency actually looks like. I worked 60-hour weeks until my vision blurred. I aggressively clawed my way up the corporate ladder, transitioning from a junior accountant to a senior auditor, then to an accounting manager, and finally securing the role of chief financial officer at a mid-sized, highly profitable pharmaceutical corporation. Every single time I earned a promotion and a salary increase, it translated directly into a larger monthly transfer to my parents. I resided in the exact same tiny, drafty studio apartment for 7 entire years. I took absolutely zero vacations. I purchased zero new furniture. I religiously wore the exact same tailored interview suit to every single corporate meeting until the fabric on the elbows physically wore thin and frayed. Every single month, $2,500 vanished. Then, it escalated to $3,000 when I secured my first major executive raise. Then, it silently crept up to $3,500. It happened with the relentless consistency of a ticking clock. It became as natural and involuntary as breathing. It simply became a core, unquestioned component of my identity. And my parents? They absolutely never missed a single beat in maintaining their flawless, wealthy facade. Juliet received a brand new luxury vehicle the moment she graduated university. She then received a massive, unearned cash down payment to secure her first luxury apartment in the city. Then, she was gifted an entire designer wardrobe to wear to her new, entry-level marketing job in Manhattan. Her birthday celebrations remained legendary, opulent affairs. They were heavily catered events featuring imported champagne, live string quartets, and professional photographers. My birthdays? I occasionally received a generic greeting card in the mail. Sometimes I received a brief, distracted phone call if my mother happened to remember the date. I was explicitly not invited to the vast majority of our extended family gatherings. "You are always so incredibly consumed with your stressful corporate work," my mother would smoothly explain whenever I discovered I had been excluded. "We simply did not want to burden you with an invitation." The mathematical reality was incredibly simple and utterly devastating. 10 years. 120 consecutive months. An average of $2,800 per automated transfer. I had silently surrendered over $336,000 to them. I single-handedly financed my parents' luxurious retirement lifestyle, while they brazenly looked everyone in their social circle in the eye and claimed they had built their wealth through their own brilliant financial acumen. I violently sacrificed the entirety of my 20s while they endlessly celebrated my sister's mediocre existence. I aggressively guarded their darkest, most humiliating secret, while they methodically, intentionally erased my presence from the family portrait. And not once, not a single, solitary time in an entire decade did either of them ever look me in the eye and utter the words, "Thank you." Not officially. Not in front of a single witness. Not in any tangible way that actually mattered to my soul. I constantly lied to myself, claiming that their verbal gratitude did not matter. Actions speak infinitely louder than words, right? They knew exactly what I had sacrificed to keep a roof over their heads. I was catastrophically wrong. I was exactly 32 years old when I finally stopped running, looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, and truly saw the hollow, exhausted shell of a woman I had allowed myself to become. Julian and I had been exclusively dating for over 2 years. He was incredibly kind, infinitely patient, and completely, utterly baffled by the Spartan, impoverished manner in which I chose to live my life. One quiet evening, as we sat in my cramped living room, he finally asked the terrifying question I had been aggressively avoiding. "Clara, have you ever seriously considered purchasing a real home for us to build a life in?" I sat in silence and mentally stared at the bleak reality of my bank accounts. After an entire decade of earning a highly lucrative, six-figure executive salary, I possessed less than $15,000 in personal savings. I owned absolutely no real estate. I possessed zero diversified investments. I held absolutely no retirement portfolio of my own. Every single drop of my excess wealth had been siphoned off to them. I honestly am not sure if I can financially afford to do that, I admitted, staring at the floor. Julian's face instantly fell. Not with anger or betrayal, but with a deep, profound concern that cut me to the bone. "Clara, I love you more than anything, but sometimes I honestly do not know exactly whose life you are living. Because you are certainly not living for yourself." He was absolutely right, and I violently hated the fact that he was right. The ultimate, final, fatal blow was delivered exactly 2 weeks later. My mother called me, her voice absolutely breathless with manic, hysterical excitement. "Clara, Juliet is officially engaged to Harrison. You remember Harrison, the incredibly successful corporate lawyer, do you not? We are going to throw her the most extraordinarily beautiful, lavish wedding this city has ever seen. Your father and I are going to personally pay for absolutely every single detail. Pay for everything." The words hit me like a physical punch to the stomach. "What exactly is the anticipated budget for an event like that?" I asked, utilizing every ounce of my willpower to keep my voice perfectly steady and corporate. "Oh, we are currently estimating somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000. Perhaps significantly more. She absolutely deserves a perfect, flawless fairy tale. Do you not agree?" $80,000. Nearly 3 entire years worth of my grueling, monthly transfers. Blood money. Money I had aggressively sacrificed vacations, relationships, and my own fundamental future to provide for their basic survival. And they were casually planning to set it all on fire to fund an opulent party for Juliet, while simultaneously lying to their entire social circle and claiming they had saved the capital themselves. I did not sleep a single minute that night, or the night after that. Something massive, something foundational, absolutely had to change. I just did not fully comprehend yet exactly how explosive that change would be. Juliet's engagement was the absolute manifestation of everything my parents had ever dreamed of achieving. Harrison Vance came from incredibly old, entrenched money, the specific kind of quiet, generational wealth that never needed to boast because everyone in the state already knew their name. His family exclusively owned half the prime commercial real estate in Connecticut. He was ruggedly handsome, impeccably polished, and looked at my sister as if she had personally hung the stars in the sky. A normal part of my soul desperately wanted to be happy for her. But the vast majority of my being just felt entirely, terrifyingly hollow. My mother telephoned me almost daily with breathless, rapid-fire wedding updates. The reception venue would be the Riverside Country Club, universally known as the most exclusive, exorbitantly expensive property in the state. 300 invited guests. A custom, imported designer gown. Tens of thousands of dollars in rare, out-of-season floral arrangements. A live, 12-piece professional orchestra. We are absolutely sparing no expense whatsoever, she gushed continuously into the phone. Juliet deserves absolute, uncompromised perfection. I finally could not hold it back any longer. I asked the burning, acidic question that had been trapped in my throat for weeks. "Mom," I asked, my voice deadly calm. "Where exactly is this massive amount of liquid capital coming from?" The line went instantly, aggressively silent. "That is honestly none of your personal concern, Clara," she finally replied, her tone shifting to ice. "I actually think it is entirely my concern. Please do not be deliberately difficult right now. This is your sister's incredibly special moment. And I am simply asking you a very basic, mathematical question. Where is the $80,000 coming from? Is it coming from us? From our family savings? Why are you acting like this? It is coming from our private savings account. The savings account. The exact same trust fund I had been systematically, aggressively filling with my own blood and sweat for a decade. Those specific savings, I clarified carefully. Do you actually mean the emergency retirement fund?" "Clara," her voice turned absolutely lethal. "I do not appreciate your accusatory tone in the slightest. We have worked incredibly hard our entire lives. We are absolutely allowed to joyously celebrate our daughter's wedding." "Which specific daughter?" I asked quietly. She slammed the phone down, disconnecting the call. I sat alone in my dark apartment, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the device. For 10 excruciating years, I had remained completely silent. I had sacrificed my youth. I had continually lied to myself, claiming that being a family meant unconditionally putting the needs of others before my own. But this was not a family. This dynamic was a razor blade slowly bleeding me dry. I needed absolute, undeniable answers. Real, documented answers. And I knew exactly who possessed the power to give them to me. I drove directly to my parents' sprawling suburban house that very Saturday morning. I found my father sitting alone in his oak-paneled study. It was the exact same room that had been strictly off-limits to me when I was a terrified child. Now, in the harsh morning light, it just looked incredibly tired and pathetic. The leather-bound books were faded. His old corporate golf trophies were covered in a thick layer of dust. He was just an aging man desperately trying to cling to a fabricated version of himself that had ceased to exist a decade ago. "Clara," he grunted, barely bothering to look up from his laptop screen. "Your mother informed me that you called her and caused a scene. I want to have a serious discussion about the wedding budget, Dad. There is absolutely nothing to discuss with you. There is $336,000 to aggressively discuss, Dad." That specific number finally captured his undivided attention. He slowly looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Excuse me? I have been systematically transferring a massive portion of my salary directly into your private retirement trust for 10 consecutive years. You know exactly where every single dime of that capital originated. And now you're unilaterally deciding to spend it on Juliet's extravagant wedding, while simultaneously lying to everyone in this town, claiming you saved the money yourself." His jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle jumping. "What exactly do you want from me, Clara? Do you want me to buy you a plastic medal? I want basic, human acknowledgement. I want absolute honesty. You just desperately want attention." He stood up, his voice aggressively rising to a shout. "That has universally been your fundamental problem, Clara. You do something moderately nice for someone, and then you immediately demand that the entire room stands up and applauds you. Juliet does not constantly require desperate validation for everything she accomplishes in life. Juliet has not accomplished a single thing of value," I fired back. "She has brought immense pride and status to this family. She has given us pure joy. What exactly have you given us? Money?" He let out a sharp, deeply bitter laugh that echoed off the wood paneling. Providing money is incredibly easy. Being a loving, supportive daughter is significantly harder. I felt as though he had just physically struck me across the face with a closed fist. I have given you 10 entire years of my youth, and we graciously gave you 22 years of our lives, he roared, slamming his hands down onto the desk. We raised you. We fed you. We financed your early education. That money you sent us was your absolute biological obligation. It is exactly what respectful children do for their parents. It was a voluntary gift, Dad. It was freely given out of love. And you never, not once in a decade. Never once what? You? He collapsed back into his leather chair, waving his hand at me in a gesture of pure, unadulterated dismissal. Grow up, Clara. The universe absolutely does not owe you a single ounce of gratitude. I turned on my heel and walked out of his study without uttering another syllable. But as I walked to my car, my decision was already permanently locked into place. The very next morning, I placed a highly confidential phone call to Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling had served as my parents' primary, private financial advisor for over 15 years. He was distinguished, impeccably professional, and fiercely discreet. He was also the only living human being outside of our immediate family unit who possessed the actual, documented truth about those automated monthly transfers. Clara, his voice over the line was incredibly warm, but heavily laced with extreme caution. I was honestly wondering when you were going to finally call me. You know exactly why I am calling you today, don't you? A heavy, prolonged pause hung on the line. I can certainly formulate a highly educated guess. I need to know the exact, current financial state of my parents' retirement trust fund. And I need to know if they have executed any massive, unauthorized withdrawals recently. Mr. Sterling remained completely quiet for a long, agonizing moment. Technically speaking, Clara, I absolutely should not disclose this specific financial information to you without securing their explicit, written permission. Mr. Sterling, I pleaded, my voice hard as steel. I have been the absolute, sole primary contributor to that specific trust fund for an entire decade. I strongly believe I have earned a modicum of transparency here. He let out a long, defeated sigh. You are entirely correct. And honestly, Clara, I have been deeply, ethically uncomfortable with managing this deceptive situation for years. I heard the rapid clicking of his keyboard as he accessed the secure files. The current, active balance in the trust is approximately $280,000. It consists almost entirely, exclusively of your direct contributions over the past 10 years. My stomach violently tightened into a knot. And the recent withdrawals, I pressed. Another heavy pause. $60,000 was aggressively withdrawn exactly 3 weeks ago. The memo line noted it was for wedding vendor deposits. I am absolutely not officially allowed to confirm that detail to you, but yes, it is gone. I slowly closed my eyes, fighting back a wave of nausea. Mr. Sterling, what exactly are my legal options in this scenario? Well, he started carefully. The monthly transfers were legally classified as voluntary gifts. You absolutely cannot retroactively reclaim the spent capital. He hesitated, choosing his next words with extreme precision. But you possess the absolute, unilateral power to stop contributing at any given moment. There is zero legal contract binding you. There is zero obligation. It is simply an automated bank transfer that you entirely control. If someone were to publicly ask you, would you be willing and able to legally verify the origin of my contributions? I possess the complete, unalterable digital records, Clara. Exact dates, routing numbers, exact dollar amounts. Absolutely everything. But Clara, why are you asking me this? Because, Mr. Sterling, I might desperately need a credible witness very soon. Silence echoed over the line. Clara, he said softly, you should probably be aware of this. Your parents officially invited me to attend the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. They invited me as an esteemed family friend. The final puzzle pieces clicked violently into place in my mind. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Sterling. I will see you there tomorrow night. My cell phone unexpectedly rang exactly 3 days before the scheduled rehearsal dinner. Clara, it is Aunt Josephine. Aunt Josephine was my mother's significantly older sister. She was the one solitary individual in our sprawling family tree who had never entirely bought into the manufactured, perfect illusion my parents constantly projected. At 72 years old, she possessed the specific kind of quiet, lethal wisdom that only comes from silently observing decades of toxic family drama unfold from the shadows. "I heard all about the extravagant wedding plans," she stated smoothly. "Your mother absolutely will not stop bragging about it to anyone who will listen. The exclusive venue, the imported flowers, the designer dress, and most importantly, how she and your father are single-handedly paying for absolutely everything in cash." I remained completely silent on my end of the line. "Clara, honey," she continued, her voice dropping to a serious octave. "Can I ask you a highly personal question?" "Go right ahead. Where exactly is that massive sum of money actually coming from?" My throat instantly tightened. "Why exactly are you asking me that?" "Because, Clara, I truly know your parents. I know for an absolute fact that they lost nearly every single penny they owned in that idiotic investment scheme 10 years ago. I know your father has not held a paying job in a decade." Her voice suddenly softened, losing all its sharp edges. "And I know you, my sweet girl. I have silently watched you work yourself completely to the bone for years, while Juliet magically gets the entire universe handed to her on a silver platter." For the very first time in years, I felt hot, genuine tears prick the corners of my eyes. "Aunt Josephine, you honestly do not have to tell me the specific details. But if what I strongly suspect is the truth, if you have been secretly carrying the financial weight of this entire family while they aggressively pretend you do not even exist, I desperately want you to know something." "What is it?" I whispered. "I see you. I have always truly seen you. And whatever explosive event happens at that rehearsal dinner, I want you to know that I will be sitting right there in your corner." I took a shaky, ragged breath. "How on earth did you figure it out?" "Because I am the older sister in my family too, Clara. I know exactly what it feels like to endlessly give and give until there is absolutely nothing left of your soul." A pause. "And I know exactly how agonizing it feels when absolutely no one bothers to notice your sacrifice." We remained on the phone for another entire hour. By the time we finally disconnected, I possessed something incredibly powerful that I had not had in years. A true, loyal ally. That night, I sat alone at my desk, illuminated only by the glow of my computer monitor, and opened a deeply buried digital folder I had not actively examined in years. Banking confirmation receipts. 120 individual emails. One for every single month spanning an entire decade. Automated transfer successfully confirmed. $2,500 routed to the Vance Family Trust. Automated transfer successfully confirmed. $3,000 routed to the Vance Family Trust. Automated transfer successfully confirmed. $3,500 routed to the Vance Family Trust. Every single automated email represented a verifiable timestamp, a legal receipt, undeniable proof of my sacrifice. I meticulously forwarded every single email directly to Mr. Sterling's secure corporate inbox. Then I aggressively backed the entire folder up to 3 separate, encrypted cloud storage services. Finally, I printed physical copies of the very first and the very last confirmation pages. Julian found me sitting on the floor at 2 in the morning, completely surrounded by stacks of printed financial documents. "What on earth are you doing?" he asked, rubbing his tired eyes. "Preparing for war," I replied simply. He slowly sat down on the carpet beside me, picking up a stack of the documents and rapidly scanning the numbers. His facial expression violently shifted from groggy confusion to pure shock, and finally to something resembling absolute awe. "Clara, the total sum of this is over $300,000. I am well aware. And they never once thanked me." Julian remained completely quiet for a long, heavy moment. Then he gently reached out and took my trembling hand. "What exactly are you planning to do with all of this?" "I honestly do not know yet." I stared blankly at the massive stack of papers. I have spent 10 entire years remaining absolutely silent. I kept foolishly hoping that one day they would finally open their eyes and see the magnitude of what I had done to save them. I kept desperately hoping it would eventually be enough to make them love me with the exact same intensity they love her. And now I finally realized that my silence was never a virtue. It was simply a psychological cage that I willingly built for myself. I squeezed his hand back tightly. I am completely done being the invisible ghost in that house, Julian. I am entirely done hoping that my silent actions will magically speak for me. What exactly changed your mind? My own mother casually referred to me as not her real daughter while speaking to Aunt Josephine last week, while simultaneously planning to spend my stolen money to fund Juliet's fairy tale wedding. Julian's jaw instantly tightened with suppressed anger. I am absolutely attending that rehearsal dinner, I stated, my voice cold and resolved. And I am not going to intentionally initiate a chaotic scene. But if they dare to try and publicly erase my existence in that room. I looked down at the towering stack of banking emails. I am going to stand up and tell everyone the absolute, unvarnished truth. Now, I want to briefly pause the narrative right here for a moment. If you are sitting there wondering exactly what I was planning to do next, trust me, I was not entirely certain myself at that specific moment in time. But before we dive into the explosive climax, I am incredibly curious. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have aggressively confronted them in front of the entire crowd, or would you have attempted to handle the devastating betrayal privately behind closed doors? Let me know your unfiltered thoughts in the comments section below. And if you are desperate to find out exactly what went down at that opulent rehearsal dinner, keep listening. The Riverside Country Club looked exactly like a meticulously curated set from a high-budget Hollywood film. Massive, glittering crystal chandeliers hung suspended from the towering, vaulted ceilings. Waterfalls of fresh, imported peonies cascaded elegantly from every conceivable horizontal surface. Impeccably dressed waiters wearing crisp, white tuxedo jackets seamlessly circulated through the crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with expensive champagne flutes. It was the highly specific brand of elegance that quietly whispered of generational old money, while simultaneously costing someone a massive fortune in new money. 80 distinguished guests mingled effortlessly beneath the soft, golden, ambient lighting. Close friends, extended family members, elite corporate colleagues. Harrison's aristocratic parents were present, immaculately dressed and possessing an impossible, effortless poise. My parents' carefully curated social circle was out in full force, draped in expensive designer dresses and wearing their flawlessly practiced, artificial smiles. Julian gently squeezed my freezing hand as we walked through the grand entrance. "Are you holding up okay?" he whispered. "Please ask me that exact same question in an hour," I replied. I had selected my outfit for the evening with extreme, calculated care. I wore a simple, beautifully tailored navy blue dress. It was undeniably elegant, yet entirely understated. I was absolutely not there to aggressively compete with Juliet for the spotlight. I was simply there to survive the night with my dignity intact. The very first person my eyes locked onto was Mr. Sterling. He was standing awkwardly near the mahogany bar, nursing a glass of expensive scotch, looking profoundly uncomfortable in his assigned role as an esteemed family friend. Our eyes met across the crowded room. He offered me an almost imperceptible, solemn nod of his head. Then I spotted Aunt Josephine seated alone at a quiet corner table. She caught my eye and offered a tiny, conspiratorial wink. It was a microscopic gesture, but it instantly steadied my racing nerves. "Clara, you actually came." Juliet rushed across the room toward me, a half-empty champagne flute clutched in her hand. She was absolutely glowing in a stunning, custom-tailored white cocktail dress. She threw her arms around me and hugged me fiercely, exactly as if we shared a deep, intimate sisterly bond. We absolutely did not. "Of course I came, Juliet. It is your rehearsal dinner. I am so incredibly glad you made it. Mom was honestly terrified you would refuse to show up. You know exactly how strange you can be regarding large family events." How I can be, I thought to myself. As if I had been the one aggressively avoiding them for a decade. "I absolutely would not miss it for the world," I replied smoothly. She eagerly bounced off to greet another group of arriving guests, leaving me standing completely alone in the center of the massive ballroom, entirely surrounded by dozens of people who barely even knew I existed. The crystal chandeliers continued to sparkle brilliantly. The expensive champagne continued to flow freely. From the outside, absolutely everything appeared flawless. I possessed absolutely no idea that in less than 30 minutes, that flawless perfection would violently shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The sharp, demanding clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal glass violently cut through the ambient chatter of the room. My father was standing proudly at the center of the head table, his champagne flute raised high into the air. My mother stood perfectly poised right beside him, draped in a custom silk dress that likely cost significantly more than the down payment on my very first car. They looked exactly like the ultimate, perfect couple. Highly successful, incredibly generous, fiercely proud parents. "May I please have everyone's undivided attention for a moment?" my father's voice boomed. It carried that familiar, artificially smooth salesman's warmth. The entire room instantly quieted down. 80 expectant faces turned simultaneously toward the head table. Eleanor and I want to express our deepest, most profound gratitude to all of you for gathering here tonight to celebrate with us. 28 years ago, we were incredibly blessed by the universe with a beautiful daughter who has brought absolutely nothing but pure, unadulterated joy into our daily lives. I physically felt Julian's warm hand find mine under the linen tablecloth, gripping it tightly. "Juliet," my father continued, his voice swelling with practiced emotion, "you have made your mother and me infinitely prouder than we ever could have imagined in our wildest dreams." And Harrison, he offered a respectful nod toward the handsome groom-to-be. We honestly could not have handpicked a better, more honorable man to officially join our family tree. Polite, scattered applause rippled through the room. Harrison offered a modest, charming smile. Then, my mother smoothly took over the microphone. "As many of you are likely aware, we have been meticulously planning this spectacular wedding for many, many months." She let out a light, musical laugh that sounded entirely fake to my ears. "And I am incredibly proud to stand here tonight and announce that Arthur and I have personally taken care of absolutely everything. The exclusive venue, the 5-star catering, the imported floral arrangements, absolutely all of it." A freezing, heavy block of ice settled deep into the pit of my stomach. "We have aggressively saved and sacrificed our entire adult lives specifically for this beautiful moment," my mother continued, her voice trembling with a masterclass display of manufactured emotion. "Because our precious daughter absolutely deserves nothing but the absolute best the world has to offer." She paused for dramatic effect. And then, her cold, calculating eyes scoured the room until they found mine. "We are proudly paying for absolutely everything in cash," she declared, her smile turning incredibly sharp and predatory. "Because our real daughter truly deserves it." The entire ballroom went completely, deathly still. It was a silence unlike any other. Every single head in the room slowly, collectively turned to look directly at me. I could physically feel the crushing, suffocating weight of 80 pairs of staring eyes. I heard the frantic, buzzing whispers instantly starting up. I felt the overwhelming, toxic wave of their pity pressing against my skin. And my mother simply stood there at the head table, maintaining her beaming, triumphant smile, eagerly waiting for me to publicly crumble into dust. But I absolutely did not crumble. I smiled right back at her. The agonizing silence stretched on for 3 massive heartbeats. Then, the whispers erupted into a low, chaotic roar. "Who exactly is she talking about? Is that not the older sister sitting over there? Why on earth would a mother say something so horrific? Oh my God, that poor girl." I could feel the collective pity of the room attempting to bury me alive. I was officially the older sister. The forgotten, defective one. The one who wasn't considered true family. Juliet stood completely frozen near the towering dessert table, her crystal champagne glass suspended awkwardly in midair. Her face had flushed a dark, angry shade of crimson. I honestly could not decipher if it was out of profound embarrassment or deep-seated shame. Harrison was deeply frowning, clearly incredibly uncomfortable with the public hostility. At the far end of the mahogany bar, Mr. Sterling had slowly set down his glass of scotch. His facial expression was entirely unreadable, but his sharp eyes were locked fiercely onto me. Aunt Josephine was already halfway out of her chair, her face contorted in fury. Julian leaned in close, his voice a fierce whisper in my ear. We can stand up and walk out of here right now. Just say the word and we are gone. I slowly shook my head. Because here is the brutal reality about being the invisible ghost in a family for 32 years. You learn how to stay perfectly still. You learn how to silently observe. You learn how to calculate. And in that precise moment, staring at my mother's smug, triumphant smile, I realized a profound truth. That cruel statement was absolutely not an accident. It was not a clumsy slip of the tongue fueled by champagne. It was highly intentional. She had meticulously planned this exact moment. She had carefully chosen her weaponized words, waiting for the absolute maximum audience exposure to deploy them. She desperately wanted to publicly humiliate me in front of everyone we knew, to permanently cement the false narrative that I was the bitter outsider, the perpetual disappointment, the defective daughter who simply did not count. She fully expected me to burst into tears, to flee the room in shame, and to ultimately prove her narrative correct. I sat there and I thought about my 10 grueling years of absolute silence. I thought about the $336,000 in automated, blood money transfers. I thought about every single birthday they had intentionally ignored, every massive personal sacrifice they had casually dismissed. And something fundamental, something architectural inside my soul violently shifted. It was not a wave of chaotic anger. It was something infinitely quieter, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. It was absolute, crystal clear clarity. I calmly picked up my crystal champagne glass and slowly rose to my feet. The chaotic whispers in the room instantly died. My mother's triumphant smile visibly flickered, a momentary glitch in her programming. Actually, I stated, my voice projecting clearly and steadily across the silent ballroom. I would very much like to add a small addendum to that lovely toast. Every single eye in the room was completely locked onto me now. I could physically feel my own heartbeat pulsing violently in my throat, but my hands holding the glass were as steady as carved stone. 10 long years of aggressively swallowing my own words had taught me one invaluable lesson. When you finally decide to open your mouth and speak, you ensure your words inflict maximum damage. Thank you so much, Mom, for that incredibly memorable, touching toast. I intentionally kept my vocal tone incredibly pleasant, highly controlled, and corporate. I especially appreciate being publicly branded as not your real daughter in front of 80 of your closest friends and colleagues. That was a remarkably elegant touch to the evening. A wave of highly uncomfortable, nervous laughter rippled through the wealthy crowd. My mother's smile was now permanently frozen on her face, resembling a grotesque mask. But since we are all embracing the spirit of sharing our deepest truths tonight, I would love to clarify one tiny, microscopic financial detail regarding the event. I slowly turned my body toward the mahogany bar, locking eyes with Mr. Sterling, who stood perfectly motionless. Mr. Sterling, you have served as our family's trusted, private financial advisor for over 15 years. Would you perhaps mind publicly confirming a minor detail for me tonight? Mr. Sterling looked exactly like a man who had just realized he was standing on the train tracks with 2 massive locomotives speeding toward him from opposite directions. Clara. My father's voice cracked like a whip across the room, sharp and panicked. This is absolutely not the appropriate time or place for this discussion. Actually, Dad, I countered smoothly, never breaking eye contact with the advisor. I firmly believe this is exactly the perfect time and place. Mom just proudly announced to everyone in this room that you both aggressively saved your entire adult lives to afford to pay for this extravagant wedding in cash. I simply want to ensure that we are all operating under the exact same definition of what the word savings actually entails. The ballroom had descended into a state of absolute, deafening silence. You could literally hear the ice cubes melting and shifting inside the guests' glasses. Mr. Sterling, I continued relentlessly. Over the course of the past 10 years, who exactly has been the absolute, primary financial contributor to my parents' private retirement trust fund? Mr. Sterling nervously shifted his weight, glancing frantically at my father, then at my mother, and finally back at me. Clara, I am honestly not entirely sure I should be publicly disclosing. You possess the certified digital records, Mr. Sterling. I sent them to you. You have possessed the verified transaction history for a decade. I intentionally kept my voice incredibly gentle, yet unyielding. I am absolutely not demanding that you violate any standard of corporate confidentiality. I am simply asking you, as an honorable man, to stand here and tell these people the unvarnished truth. The agonizing silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. Then, Mr. Sterling slowly straightened his posture, pulling his shoulders back. I strongly believe, he stated quietly, his voice carrying an unexpected weight, that everyone in this room deserves to know the absolute truth. He loudly cleared his throat, commanding the attention of the room. According to my certified corporate records, he began, his voice echoing clearly across the silent tables. Over the course of the past 10 years, Ms. Clara Vance has systematically transferred approximately $336,000 directly into her parents' private retirement accounts. A massive, collective gasp violently rippled through the assembled crowd. That specific retirement fund, Mr. Sterling continued without hesitation, which currently holds a balance of around $280,000 following several massive, recent withdrawals, consists almost entirely, exclusively of Clara's direct, automated contributions. Monthly transfers. Executed every single month. For 10 consecutive years. I stood in silence and watched the entire room attempt to process the mathematical reality of his statement. I watched their eyes widen in absolute horror. I watched heads rapidly turning back and forth. I watched the devastating math finally click into place in their minds. My mother's face had completely drained of all blood, turning a sickly, translucent white. "That is highly confidential, private family business," she hissed, her voice trembling with raw panic. "You made it public business, Mom," I replied, my voice remaining chillingly calm. "You boldly stood up and called me not your real daughter in front of everyone in this room. You proudly proclaimed that you were financing this entire charade. I am simply clarifying for the audience exactly whose bank account that money actually originated from." "This is absolutely outrageous behavior," my father sputtered, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Sterling, you possessed absolutely no legal right to." He possessed every single legal and moral right to speak the truth, I violently interrupted, my voice finally rising in volume. "And so do I." Out of the extreme corner of my eye, I saw Aunt Josephine aggressively stand up from her table. "Eleanor," her voice cut through the thick tension of the room like a serrated knife. "Is this accusation true? Has Clara been entirely financially supporting your lifestyle for a decade while you treated her like an unwanted stranger in your own home?" My mother's mouth repeatedly opened and closed, completely unable to form a single coherent syllable. Harrison had aggressively pulled Juliet to the far edge of the room. They were engaged in a frantic, hushed conversation. He had his hand firmly planted on her shoulder, and her face was completely crumpled with utter confusion and something else entirely. Was it genuine guilt? The other 80 guests had absolutely no idea where to direct their gaze. Some stared at my parents with newfound, unconcealed disgust. Others nervously whispered behind cupped hands. Several younger guests were already covertly pulling out their smartphones to text the gossip. "This is pure insanity." My father desperately attempted to regain control of the narrative. "This is all a massive misunderstanding. We will discuss this privately as a unified family at home." "No." I violently shook my head. "We have endured 10 excruciating years of handling things privately. 10 years of your toxic, buried secrets. 10 years of me remaining completely silent while you systematically erased my existence." I slowly raised my crystal champagne glass high into the air. Now it is finally time for something radically different. The sprawling ballroom was utterly, terrifyingly still. I looked directly at my parents. I truly, deeply looked at them for the first time in my life. My father, red-faced, sweating, and absolutely furious that his illusion of control had been shattered. My mother, pale, trembling violently, and utterly humiliated in front of the only people whose opinions she valued. For 32 long, agonizing years, I had desperately, pathetically craved for them to truly see me. To love me with the exact same fierce intensity that they loved Juliet. To simply acknowledge that my existence mattered to them. Now, standing victorious in this opulent room, entirely surrounded by witnesses to their destruction, I realized a profound, life-altering truth. Their genuine approval was absolutely never going to materialize. And more importantly, I finally realized that I no longer needed it to survive. Mom, you publicly asked the room who your real daughter truly is. I maintained my vocal tone with absolute, terrifying steadiness. Allow me to definitively answer that question for you. She aggressively gripped my father's arm, her fingernails digging into his suit jacket. Your real daughter is the exhausted woman who willingly worked grueling 60-hour weeks while you casually lied and told everyone in town she was simply too selfish and busy for family events. I took a deep, shuddering breath, feeling the invisible chain snapping. Your real daughter is the woman who completely gave up her dream of purchasing her own home just so you wouldn't be humiliated by foreclosure. The words began to flow out of me with incredible ease now. 10 years of suffocating silence, finally breaking like a massive dam. Your real daughter is the woman who faithfully kept your humiliating financial secret for an entire decade simply because you begged her to. The woman who never breathed a word of the truth to Juliet. Who never told a single soul. Who violently sacrificed her 20s, her financial security, and her entire future to keep a roof over your head. My mother had finally begun to cry. Genuine, ugly tears of absolute public humiliation. But I was absolutely not finished. But here is the critical thing you failed to understand about real daughters, Mom. They inherently deserve to be treated with the basic respect of family. And I absolutely have not been. I raised my crystal glass even higher. So, I possess exactly 3 final words for you tonight. The entire room collectively held its breath. I looked directly, unflinchingly into my mother's terrified eyes. I am stopping payments. My mother's face went completely, terrifyingly slack. Effective immediately. As of this exact second. I have already formally notified the banking institutions and Mr. Sterling. The automated transfers are permanently terminated today. I slowly lowered my glass to the table. You desperately want to pay for absolutely everything? Now you will actually have to figure out how to do it. Absolute, dead silence reigned in the room. Then, the delicate stem of my father's crystal champagne glass slipped through his trembling, sweating fingers. It hit the hardwood floor and violently shattered into 100 glittering pieces. The sharp, explosive sound of breaking glass seemed to violently snap everyone in the room back to reality. You cannot possibly do this to us. My father's voice was a hoarse, desperate croak. We established an agreement. We possess absolutely nothing in writing, Dad. There is 0 legal contract. There is 0 binding obligation. I intentionally maintained my vocal tone as strictly professional, exactly as if I were leading a quarterly corporate risk assessment meeting. I provided you with voluntary gifts. Incredibly generous, life-saving gifts. And I possess every single legal and moral right in the universe to permanently stop giving them. Clara, please. My mother aggressively reached her hands out toward me across the space, tears streaming endlessly down her ruined makeup. You will completely destroy this family. Is that truly what you want? I am absolutely not destroying anything, Mom. I am simply refusing to allow you to destroy me anymore. Mr. Sterling quietly gathered his suit jacket from the bar stool, appearing incredibly, visibly relieved to finally have the toxic truth out in the open air. He caught my eye from across the room and offered a single, firm nod. It was absolute validation. It was complete confirmation. Harrison had forcefully pulled Juliet to the absolute furthest edge of the room. They were engaged in a highly intense, hushed argument. He had both of his hands firmly planted on her shoulders, and her face was completely crumpled with utter confusion and something else entirely. Was it the dawning realization of her own complicity? The remaining guests had absolutely no idea where to direct their gaze. Some stared openly at my parents with entirely new, disgusted eyes. Others whispered frantically behind cupped hands. Several were already aggressively typing on their phones. This is absolute, pure insanity. My father desperately attempted to regain control one final time. You are making yourself look completely ridiculous, Harrison. Aunt Josephine's voice sliced through his bluster like a machete. Stop talking. You have already said entirely too much. She confidently walked across the room and took a stand directly beside me. For an entire decade, I have silently watched my brilliant niece slowly fade into the invisible background while you continuously threw parades to celebrate Juliet. For a decade, I deeply suspected something in this family's dynamic was fundamentally, financially corrupt. She looked directly at my mother, her own flesh and blood sister, with an expression that looked terrifyingly like pure pity. I honestly never imagined the reality was this utterly grotesque. My mother sobbed significantly louder, burying her face in her hands. I reached out and touched Aunt Josephine's arm with profound gratitude. Then I turned my focus back to my parents one final time. "I genuinely do not desire for you to suffer," I stated quietly, the anger completely bleeding out of my voice, leaving only exhaustion. "But I am permanently, irrevocably done suffering on your behalf." Julian slowly stood up from the table and gently took my hand in his. It was finally time to leave the battlefield. I picked up my small clutch purse and looked across the room at Juliet one last time. She was still weeping uncontrollably, with Harrison's arm wrapped protectively around her waist. I began to walk toward the exit, and as I passed her, she physically flinched backward as if I were about to strike her. "Juliet." "Clara, I swear to God I did not know. I swear on my life I had no idea." "I believe you." And I genuinely did. Juliet had been raised inside an impenetrable, golden bubble of extreme favoritism so absolute and complete that she had never possessed a reason to question where the magic money tree originated from. I absolutely do not blame you for a single piece of this disaster. Her lower lip trembled violently. "But the wedding will still happen, won't it? Harrison genuinely loves me. That part is real." I briefly reached out and squeezed her hand. "But it absolutely will not happen financed by my blood money. And I sincerely hope that someday you mature enough to understand exactly why that boundary matters." I turned to walk away. Julian was already waiting by the heavy oak doors, my jacket draped over his arm. "Clara." My mother's voice shrieked, shrill and entirely desperate, echoing through the silent room. "You are actively walking away from this family." I paused directly on the threshold. "No, Mom. I am finally walking toward a family that actually exists in reality." I looked at Julian. I looked at Aunt Josephine, who was hurriedly gathering her purse to leave the venue with us. I am walking toward a family that actually sees my soul. A family that truly values my existence. A family that absolutely does not require me to purchase my seat at their table. I stepped out into the cool, dark night. The air tasted incredibly clean and sharp. Behind me, leaking through the heavy doors, I could hear my father's voice aggressively rising in panic. I heard my mother's hysterical sobs. The absolute chaos of an opulent celebration that had rapidly devolved into something else entirely. Julian wrapped his warm arm tightly around my trembling shoulders. "You executed the absolute right decision today." "I know I did," I replied, my voice finally cracking under the emotional weight. "So why on earth does it hurt so incredibly much?" Aunt Josephine quickly caught up to us in the dimly lit parking lot. She forcefully pulled me into a deep, warm, and entirely unexpected embrace. "Because genuine love absolutely does not magically evaporate just because you establish a necessary boundary," she whispered into my hair. "But neither should your self-respect." I finally allowed myself to completely break down and cry in her arms. And then, finally, after 10 years of suffocating silence, my cell phone completely exploded the very next morning. 15 frantic, missed calls from my father. 23 aggressive text messages from my mother, wildly ranging in tone from tearful, pathetic apologies to furious, venomous accusations. Dozens of voicemails that I absolutely could not bring myself to listen to. Julian quietly made me a plate of pancakes while I sat at the kitchen island, blankly staring at the glowing screen. The very first text message from my mom: "Clara, please answer the phone. We desperately need to talk. You have completely, publicly humiliated us." The fifth message: "I am your biological mother. How could you possibly inflict this kind of trauma upon me?" The 10th message: "If you refuse to call us back immediately, do not even bother showing up to the wedding ceremony." The 15th message: I always inherently knew you were deeply, toxically jealous of Juliet's happiness. I calmly powered down the device. Mid-morning, a completely different name illuminated Julian's phone screen. Juliet. Should I answer it? He asked softly, holding up the device. I offered a slow nod. He tapped the screen and placed the call on speakerphone. Clara, it's Juliet. Her voice was incredibly thick and raspy from hours of crying. I know you're intentionally ignoring your phone right now. I desperately needed to ask you a question. Ask me whatever you need to, I replied. Is my entire wedding permanently ruined? Is everything going to completely fall apart because of? She stopped herself, taking a ragged breath. I am so sorry. That sounds incredibly selfish of me to ask right now. It is okay. It is your wedding day. But Harrison explicitly told me last night that he still desperately wants to marry me. He assured me that his family will step in and provide financial assistance if it is required. He says. She took another shaky, uneven breath. He firmly told me that I absolutely should have recognized that something was fundamentally wrong with our finances. He said I should have possessed the maturity to ask questions. I slowly closed my eyes, feeling a profound wave of exhaustion. Juliet, your wedding is absolutely not ruined. Harrison clearly loves you. But yes, the reality of your life is going to drastically change now. Mom and Dad will absolutely not be able to finance a single thing they promised you. Silence stretched over the speaker. Clara, do you actively hate me? The massive, terrifying question hung suspended in the air. No, I finally answered, my voice gentle but firm. I absolutely do not hate you, Juliet. I am just permanently done pretending that the foundation of our lives was ever fair. An automated email notification suddenly pinged loudly on my open laptop. It was from Mr. Sterling's office. Automated transfer permanently terminated as requested. Official confirmation documents attached. It was finally, truly, legally over. The social fallout spread through the community significantly faster than I ever could have anticipated. Within a single week, the explosive story had circulated through every single node of my parents' sprawling social circle. 80 prominent guests had witnessed the devastating confrontation firsthand. 80 people had driven home that night and immediately recounted the horrific details to their spouses, their close friends, their exclusive book clubs, and their wealthy golf partners. Aunt Josephine called me almost daily to provide gleeful updates. Your father actually got aggressively cornered at the country club lounge yesterday afternoon, she reported, her voice thick with satisfaction. Frank, you know, his old, wealthy golf partner, walked right up to him and asked him point blank, "You actually allowed your young daughter to entirely support your lifestyle for a decade, and you still treated her like garbage in public?" I did not feel a rush of triumphant victory. I merely felt an overwhelming sense of profound exhaustion. What exactly did he say in response to that? He desperately attempted to explain it all away. He claimed you were wildly exaggerating the numbers. He tried to claim that healthy families naturally assist each other financially. She paused, letting out a dry chuckle. Frank absolutely did not buy a single word of it. And frankly, neither did anyone else in the room. My mother, apparently, had rapidly become the primary subject of venomous whispers at her exclusive women's social club. The exact same affluent women she had spent an entire decade desperately trying to impress with fabricated stories of her highly successful, wealthy family were now looking at her with thinly veiled disgust. Did you hear the shocking truth about the Vance situation? I always inherently suspected something was profoundly off about them. That poor, neglected girl, Clara. All those agonizing years of sacrifice. Exactly 2 weeks prior to the scheduled wedding date, my parents were forced to make a humiliating, public announcement. The grand reception was being drastically scaled down. The 300 invited guests were ruthlessly slashed to 100. The 12-piece professional orchestra was abruptly replaced by a local DJ. The exorbitant, imported floral arrangements were swapped for basic, local centerpieces. Harrison's wealthy family quietly, discreetly covered the remaining financial difference to ensure the event actually occurred. Juliet called me the morning after the announcement. Mom is desperately lying to everyone, claiming the downgrades are due to unexpected vendor changes. Her voice was incredibly small and fragile. But Harrison's parents know the absolute truth. They were completely unimpressed with the deception. I am genuinely sorry you have to deal with this, Juliet. Please do not be sorry. She hesitated for a long moment. Harrison said something incredibly profound to me last night in bed. He said, if your older sister possessed the loyalty to silently do all of that for your parents while receiving absolutely zero recognition, just imagine how fiercely loyal she would be to people who actually valued and appreciated her. A heavy lump instantly formed in my throat. He sounds like a truly good, honorable man, Juliet. He really is. And Clara. I think I am finally starting to understand reality. 3 quiet months later, I walked into a local bank branch and officially opened a high-yield savings account. It sounds like an incredibly minor, mundane detail, but to me, it was monumental. For the very first time in an entire decade, the money I bled to earn actually remained under my control. There were 0 automated transfers draining my lifeblood. There were 0 silent, unappreciated sacrifices. It was just my money. Mine. Julian and I officially began touring open apartments together. Real, spacious apartments with enough square footage to actually build a future inside. Every single listing we walked through felt exactly like a heavy door finally swinging open. At the pharmaceutical corporation, the crushing, invisible stress that had permanently resided in my shoulders for years finally began to dissipate. I received an aggressive promotion. I was officially named the Chief Financial Officer without the acting prefix. And for the very first time, I actually allowed myself to celebrate the achievement. Julian and I dined at a breathtaking, expensive restaurant. We ordered a bottle of imported champagne. He sat across the candlelit table, looked deeply into my eyes, and explicitly told me how incredibly proud he was of my resilience. I also began intensive trauma therapy. That process was significantly more grueling than I ever anticipated. Unpacking 32 years of systemic neglect and feeling entirely invisible does not magically resolve itself in 1 session, or even 10. But slowly, painstakingly, I began to comprehend toxic behavioral patterns I had never possessed the vocabulary to identify before. You actively developed what clinical psychology refers to as a severe fawn response, my therapist gently explained during one particularly brutal session. When you subconsciously sense the potential for parental rejection, you aggressively attempted to prevent it by making yourself universally useful, by forcing yourself to be needed. And that is exactly why I surrendered everything I had to them. You were absolutely not trying to purchase their love, Clara. You were simply, desperately trying to earn a fundamental place in the family ecosystem. But here is the critical revelation. She leaned forward, locking eyes with me. Your rightful place in a family should absolutely never require a financial admission fee. I thought deeply about that profound statement for many weeks that followed. Aunt Josephine rapidly evolved into my closest, most cherished family connection. We maintained weekly, hour-long phone calls and scheduled monthly Sunday brunches. She shared incredibly revealing stories about my mother as a young woman. Not to excuse her horrific behavior, but to help me clinically understand the origin of her pathology. Eleanor was always utterly terrified of how things appeared to the outside world, Josephine explained over coffee. Our own parents operated the exact same way. She learned at a young age that societal appearance was everything. And when the harsh reality of her life failed to match the perfect image she craved, she shrugged her shoulders sadly. She simply chose to aggressively deny reality entirely. It absolutely did not make the decades of abuse acceptable, but it finally helped me stop endlessly asking myself the agonizing question, what exactly did I do wrong? The absolute answer was nothing. I had done absolutely nothing wrong. We are rapidly approaching the conclusion of my story, but I want to ask you a deeply personal question. Have you ever been forced to establish a severe, non-negotiable boundary with someone you deeply loved? Was it a toxic family member, an abusive friend, or a manipulative partner you falsely trusted? I would genuinely be honored to read your story. Please drop it in the comments section below. I personally read every single one. And if you are currently navigating a similar, suffocating situation right now, I sincerely hope my journey provides you with a microscopic shred of courage. Let us finish this narrative together. Juliet's scaled-down wedding was significantly smaller than initially planned, but it was undeniably beautiful. I attended the ceremony. Not for the sake of my parents. I barely spoke a single word to them, but exclusively for Juliet. Because she was my sister, and because she was finally, slowly beginning to open her eyes and truly see my existence. The ceremony was hosted in a stunning, lush garden situated behind Harrison's family's sprawling estate. Simple white chairs were arranged on the vibrant green grass. A modest, elegant archway covered in local, seasonal flowers served as the altar. It felt incredibly intimate and authentically real. I sat quietly in the very back row with Julian, wearing a stunning, expensive dress that I had happily purchased for myself for the very first time in years. Aunt Josephine was seated 2 rows ahead of me, continually turning around to shoot me beaming, encouraging smiles. When Juliet finally walked down the grassy aisle, she looked absolutely radiant. And when her scanning eyes eventually found mine in the back row, she paused her stride for just a fraction of a second and clearly mouthed 2 silent words to me. "Thank you." I offered her a slow, affirming nod. At the reception dinner, my parents aggressively kept their distance from my table. We exchanged brief, icy, painfully polite greetings and absolutely nothing more. My mother looked drastically older and significantly more fragile than she had just 3 months prior. My father appeared physically diminished, somehow shrinking inside his expensive, tailored suit. Right before Julian and I prepared to leave the venue, my mother cautiously approached me. "Clara," her voice was strained, tight, and incredibly vulnerable. Do you still love us at all?" I stood there and genuinely considered the massive weight of the question. "Yes," I finally answered, my voice steady. "I actually do." A brief, desperate flicker of hope illuminated her eyes. "But I finally love myself significantly more now," I continued, shattering the hope. "And that inherently means I can no longer continue being the person who surrenders absolutely everything while receiving absolutely nothing in return. We could potentially try to change," she whispered. "Perhaps you could." I gently reached out and briefly touched her arm. "But facilitating that change is absolutely no longer my moral responsibility. You have to genuinely desire to change. Not simply because I abruptly stopped paying your bills, but because you finally realized that what you did to my soul was fundamentally evil." She did not possess a single coherent answer to that statement. I sought out Juliet before exiting the garden and handed her a thick, sealed envelope. "It is absolutely not a check," I clarified with a small smile. "It is a personal letter. Please read it whenever you feel emotionally ready." She threw her arms around me and hugged me fiercely. It was the very first genuine, unforced hug we had shared since we were tiny children. It felt exactly like a fragile, beautiful new beginning. Exactly 6 months later, Julian and I officially moved into our very first shared apartment. It was not a sprawling mansion. It featured 2 modest bedrooms, a tiny, sunlit balcony, and a cramped kitchen where we constantly bumped into each other while cooking. But it was entirely, undeniably ours. It was fully funded with my own, hard-earned capital. Money that I had bled to earn, and finally possessed the power to keep. The very first night in the new space, we sat together on the small balcony, eating cheap takeout food and drinking inexpensive wine, quietly watching the vibrant city lights twinkle in the distance. "Do you harbor any lingering regrets?" Julian asked quietly, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. I thought deeply about the question. Only that I foolishly waited so incredibly long to save myself. My ongoing relationship with my parents eventually settled into exactly what it needed to be: highly distant, superficial, but generally devoid of active hostility. I occasionally called them on major holidays. I visited for brief, highly structured periods. But the era of easy, unlimited access to my resources was permanently dead, and so was the toxic expectation that I existed solely to fix their manufactured crises. They were brutally forced to adjust to reality. They ultimately had to sell their sprawling, suburban house, downsize into a significantly smaller, modest condo, and forcefully learn how to survive within the strict limits of their actual financial means. My mother constantly complained bitterly about the downgrade to anyone who would listen, but significantly fewer people in their social circle were willing to listen these days. Juliet and I slowly, cautiously grew closer. She read the long letter I wrote her and reportedly cried uncontrollably for an entire hour. Then she called my phone and we talked. We really, truly talked for the very first time in our entire adult lives. I was so incredibly, stupidly blind, she sobbed into the phone. I am so profoundly sorry, Clara. You honestly did not know, Juliet. I absolutely should have possessed the maturity to ask the hard questions. I should have seen the reality of the dynamic. Perhaps you should have. But we absolutely cannot rewrite the history of the past. We can only consciously choose how we navigate what comes next. I look in the mirror these days and I finally, truly recognize the powerful woman staring back at me. I am no longer the invisible ghost. I am no longer the forgotten, defective daughter. I am no longer the sacrificial lamb who endlessly bleeds until there is nothing left. I am simply Clara. I am 32 years old, and I am finally figuring out how to exist for myself. And you know what? That is absolutely enough. In fact, it was always enough. I just had to permanently stop waiting for broken people to give me permission to believe it. After the explosive dust finally settled, I spent a massive amount of time in therapy dissecting exactly why this happened. Why did my parents treat me with such profound, systemic cruelty? Were they inherently evil, sadistic monsters? My trauma therapist helped me comprehend a highly uncomfortable, vital truth. Human beings are very rarely the intentional villains in their own internal narratives. They are usually just deeply flawed people, violently shaped by their own unhealed fears and deep-seated insecurities. My father tragically lost his high-status corporate identity at 55. For a prideful man who had constructed his entire sense of masculine worth on being the infallible provider, that loss was absolutely psychologically devastating. He simply could not handle the humiliating reality of being financially dependent upon his invisible, neglected daughter. So, his fragile ego aggressively rewrote the narrative. My life-saving support morphed into a basic obligation rather than an incredible sacrifice. My extreme generosity was twisted into a biological duty. It was infinitely easier for his ego to accept that delusion than to look in the mirror and admit he desperately needed my rescue. My mother's pathology was significantly more complex. She had been raised in a rigid, aristocratic household where societal appearance was absolutely everything. When I was born prematurely and suffered through a sickly infancy, I strongly suspect some dark part of her soul deeply resented me for disrupting her vision of the flawless, perfect family image. Juliet arrived years later, perfectly healthy, stunningly beautiful, and incredibly easy to manage, the exact, pristine daughter she had always fantasized about possessing. Admitting the horrific reality of what she had done to my life would require her to simultaneously admit that her entire maternal identity had been a toxic, abusive lie for 30 years. It was infinitely easier for her to deny reality. It was easier to aggressively pretend the abuse was not happening. None of this psychological analysis excuses their behavior. Understanding the mechanics of abuse is absolutely not the same thing as forgiving the abuser. But acquiring that understanding finally allowed me to stop endlessly asking the agonizing question that had haunted my entire existence. What exactly did I do wrong to deserve this? The absolute, undeniable answer, I finally realized, was absolutely nothing. I did not do a single thing wrong. I was simply, tragically born to two individuals who were fundamentally, psychologically unequipped to love me in the healthy manner I desperately required. That was their catastrophic failure as human beings, not mine. And remaining silent, bleeding endlessly, pathetically hoping they would eventually open their eyes and see my worth? That was me desperately attempting to fix a broken machine that was never, ever my responsibility to repair. You absolutely cannot earn genuine love from people who fundamentally do not possess the capacity to give it. But you can learn how to fiercely, unconditionally give that love to yourself. That is the ultimate lesson I desperately wish I had comprehended 10 grueling years earlier. So, what about my own culpability? What was my fatal, character-defining mistake? I truly believe that I operated under the delusion that if I just gave enough of my soul, loved them hard enough, and sacrificed enough of my own blood, I could finally purchase my rightful seat at the family table. I falsely believed that my massive, undeniable actions would eventually speak louder than my silence. I thought that someday, somehow, they would be forced to look at me and acknowledge the magnitude of what I had done to save them. That desperation was my ultimate weakness, and they ruthlessly, systematically exploited it. Perhaps they did not do it consciously, but they certainly did it consistently. I was utterly terrified of being permanently abandoned. I was terrified of having my deepest fear confirmed, that I was inherently unlovable. So, I aggressively transformed myself into something entirely indispensable instead. I falsely equated being needed with being truly wanted. They're absolutely not the same thing. If you are sitting there watching this video and my words are resonating deeply within your chest, if you recognize the agonizing reflection of yourself in my story, I desperately need to tell you something vital. You absolutely do not have to burn your own life to the ground just to keep toxic people warm. Your inherent value as a human being is absolutely not measured by the magnitude of the sacrifices you make for others. Establishing ironclad, non-negotiable boundaries is not an act of selfishness. It is the purest form of survival. Remaining silent is not maintaining the peace. Sometimes, it is just a psychological cage you voluntarily build around your own mind, desperately waiting for someone else to finally notice and unlock the heavy door. Here is the brutal, unvarnished truth. They are never going to unlock that door for you. You have to find the courage to shatter the lock yourself. And I promise you, it will hurt. Walking away from the people you are biologically programmed to love, even when they are actively destroying you, is agonizing. Actively choosing to save yourself when you have spent your entire existence prioritizing everyone else feels incredibly unnatural, and it hurts deeply. But staying in the cage hurts infinitely more. I know this as an absolute fact because I endured the pain of staying for 10 long years. So, if you are currently trapped in that dark place right now, desperately wondering whether you inherently deserve better treatment, allow me to answer that question for you with absolute certainty. Yes, you absolutely do. Not simply because I am telling you so, but because it is an undeniable, universal truth. And the exact moment you finally start believing it, truly, deeply believing it in your bones, the entire trajectory of your universe changes. I am absolutely no longer consumed by anger toward my parents. I am no longer obsessed with seeking revenge or punishing them. I am just finally, for the very first time in my entire existence, prioritizing my own peace. It is not an act of vengeance. It is a profound act of healing. And the most beautiful part is, I am just getting started. Thank you so much for staying with me until the absolute end of this journey. If this narrative touched your soul in any capacity, I would be deeply honored to hear from you. Please drop a comment, share your own personal story of survival. I promise you, I read every single one. If you have not already done so, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It truly means infinitely more to me than you know. And please, check out the description box below for more incredible stories of resilience exactly like this one. I strongly believe you will forge a deep connection with them too. Until we meet again next time, please take aggressive care of yourself out there. You absolutely deserve it.